Welcome back, everybody. This week, we're taking a look at Pelikan Edelstein Topaz. Now, one thing before we get started, the astute among you may notice that we're zoomed in quite a bit. And it's not that we're actually zoomed in, it's that the camera is a lot closer to the table than it normally is. There's a couple reasons for that, but the main one is, when I'm doing these reviews, I want you to be able to see as much detail as possible, and not having to zoom in makes the most amount of sense when it comes to that. So let's go ahead and take a look at a few things when it comes to the bottle, and then we'll go to the writing review. So with the Edelstein bottles, I really like how they're designed. You've got a nice quality glass that allows you to see the inner ink reservoir, which has a nice shape on the inside as well. The bottle is concave, which makes it a little bit more sturdy in hand when you're gripping it so it doesn't accidentally just slip out. And I really like the incorporation of the silver Pelikan on the cap. And just overall, for a 50 ml bottle, it just has a nice look and feel to it compared to the 4001 series, which, yes, this is one of the larger 4001 series bottles. But side by side, I would definitely say that if I'm going to be choosing a bottle, I'm going to be choosing the Edelstein bottle any day of the week. So let's go ahead and quit talking bottles, though, and take a look at the writing sample. Now, for the writing sample, I did use the Atelier Lusso Andromeda with the super stub nib. Right now, though, the nib that's on here is the medium nib that was sent as a replacement for the broad bit. Managed to not end up quite right. And that nib is currently right here. I figured I'd go ahead and switch back to a medium, so next week's ink review is probably going to be with this medium nib instead of the super stub nib. That aside, though, let's go ahead and break out the paper so you can take a look at Pelikan Edelstein Topaz. And for that, we break out the 68 GSM Tomoe River Paper Endless Works Notebook. So right off the bat, a few notes about the ink itself. I love the blue that we get here. It's a good shade, and honestly, from the lighter portions to the darker portions, it's pretty uniform. I mean, there's not that much of a difference between light and dark. I mean, obviously there is some, but it's not a completely different beast from one to the other that you can get from a few inks. Now, let's take a little bit of a closer look here. It's a good soothing blue. More of a ocean blue to me than a topaz blue, but that's just me being pedantic. And yes, Pelikan inks do tend to be dry, but this one is kind of a medium to medium wet. And that, yes, does have a lot to do with the nib that it was in, at least for the smear here. On the dry time, you do get a little bit more of an accurate story. And you can see here that the dry time, we're looking at about 15 seconds to be fully dry, which is to be expected. A lot of the Pelikan inks I've used tend to be dry by the 15-second mark. Also, looking at the shading, here's what I was talking about. From the lightest at the first pass down to the darkest at the fourth pass, well, technically third pass because there's not too much saturation difference there, it maintains the same overall shade. Yes, it gets darker, it gets a little bit more saturated, but the shade really stays the same from the lightest to the darkest, and I really like that about this ink. And let's go ahead and take a look at that ink blot. As is the case with all the writing samples I do, I like doing the ink blot because it gives you a good idea of what you're going to be looking at from the lightest to the darkest colors. And with Topaz, I really like what you get here. Look at one of the lighter portions here, and then look at the darker portion here. I really like the progression from this lightest color to the darker color. And this is on Tomoe River paper. So yes, you're going to get more out of the ink with Tomoe than you are any others. But if we look at the water sample before actually doing the water sample, you can see you're still getting that color here on the Rhodia dot pad as well. So side by side, the color is pretty consistent. Speaking of the water sample, though, let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so for the water sample, it actually didn't do that bad. This ink doesn't tout water resistance at all, and it's definitely not going to perform like an Iron Gall ink, or for that matter, an ink like Athena Eternal Blue. But for an ink with no water resistance properties, it did okay. It's still about 25% there. Yes, some of the blue did stain the rest of the paper, but it's legible enough that you could recover it, and that's not a bad result. So let's go ahead and wrap up the video and talk final thoughts for Pelikan Edelstein Topaz. So looking back on the ink, we've got a few things going for it. It's got good shading, that nice, very subtle sheen if you get it wet enough, and the dry time is really good, especially on Tomoe River paper, but that's something that you're going to find with a lot of Pelikan inks, even on the 4001 series. So does that really justify the higher price tag that you get for the 50 ml bottle? I think it could honestly be a couple dollars cheaper, but overall, it's not bad. It's 50 ml of good quality ink and a good color. But that being said, there's a lot of other blues out there that are cheaper price and about the same amount of volume. So it really comes down to personal preference on this one. If I was to buy the ink all over again, would I buy Topaz? Probably not. Instead, I would probably go with something like the 4001 Turquoise, which I'm actually going to be reviewing that one probably next week or the week after, so we'll look at it then. But my point is, at the price point that the 62 ml of Turquoise was at compared to the 50 ml of Topaz, even though it's a good color, even though it's performing very well out of this pen, I just don't think it justifies the price for me. It may for you, and if it does, awesome, get the ink. If it doesn't, there's plenty of good alternatives out there that can get you the same color and the same shade, but a lot less price. So if you like the video, do the thumbs up, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff. Click on the links down below to support the channel either on Patreon or by following it on Twitter and Instagram. Till next time, thank you guys for watching.